The Valorian Empire had ruled the stars for 500 years. They had conquered 12 star systems. They had crushed hundreds of species under their feet. Their method was simple. They broke the mind before they broke the body. No prisoner had ever lasted more than 3 days in their interrogation rooms. Then they captured Hannah Wright. The battle above Proxima Station had been short and brutal. The human ship Starfall had been alone when the Valorian fleet found it. Captain Hannah Wright had ordered her crew to fight. They had no choice. The Valorians did not take prisoners unless they wanted something from them. The Starfall was a small ship. It had only 40 crew members. Against 12 Valorian warships, they had no chance. But Hannah did not surrender. She fired every weapon. She used every trick she knew. She took down 2 enemy ships before the plasma cannons tore through her hull. When the smoke cleared, Hannah was the only one still breathing. The Valorians pulled her from the wreckage. They saw the rank on her uniform. A captain. A high-ranking officer from the strange new species that had started pushing back against their expansion. This human might know things. Important things. The location of their home world. The size of their fleet. Their weaknesses. They brought her to the Imperial Palace on Valoria Prime. The palace was a massive structure of black stone and dark metal. It had been built to make visitors feel small. The hallways were wide enough for giants. The ceilings disappeared into shadow. Guards with scales of deep purple stood at every door. Their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. Hannah was taken to the interrogation wing. This was where the Grand Inquisitor worked. His name was Varth, and he was the most feared being in the Empire. He had broken 10,000 prisoners across 40 worlds. Kings had begged for mercy at his feet. Warlords had wept like children after a single hour in his chamber. Varth was tall, even by Valorian standards. His scales shifted between purple and black, depending on his mood. When he was pleased, they were light. When he was angry, they turned the color of a starless night. His voice was deep and smooth like oil sliding over stone. He looked at Hannah Wright and saw nothing special. She was small by Valorian standards. Her skin was soft and pale. Her hair was the color of dark wood, cut short above her shoulders. Her eyes were gray, like clouds before a storm. Just another prisoner, he thought. She would break within the hour. He was wrong. Varth started with questions. Simple questions. What was her name? Where was she from? How many ships did humanity have? Hannah sat in a metal chair, her wrists bound, and said nothing. She did not look at him. She did not look at anything. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the far wall, as if she could see something there that no one else could see. Varth asked again. His voice grew louder. He threatened her with pain. He threatened her with death. He described what he would do to her if she did not cooperate. Hannah said nothing. The first day passed. Varth used techniques that had shattered the minds of warriors twice her size. He used sounds that hurt the ears. He used lights that burned the eyes. He used cold that froze the bones and heat that boiled the blood. Hannah sat in her chair and did not make a sound. The second day was worse. Varth brought in his tools. Metal things with sharp edges. Things that cut and burned and tore. He used them carefully, precisely, in ways that caused the most pain without causing death. Hannah bled. Hannah shook. But Hannah did not speak. By the third day, Varth was frustrated. His scales had turned completely black. He had never seen anything like this. Human bodies were fragile. Their nervous system should have betrayed them long ago. The pain should have been impossible to bear. But this woman bore it. Word began to spread through the palace. The servants whispered to each other as they cleaned the halls. The guards exchanged looks when they thought no one was watching. A human prisoner was resisting the Grand Inquisitor. not just resisting, ignoring him, as if he was nothing more than an insect buzzing in her ear. By the end of the first week, the whispers had reached the noble houses. Lords and ladies who never thought about prisoners were suddenly curious. Who was this human? How was she doing this? Was she even real? Vorath worked in shifts now. He slept for a few hours, then returned to the chamber. Other interrogators joined him. They asked questions in rotation. They never let Hannah rest. They never let her sleep. They gave her only enough water to keep her alive. Hannah sat in her chair. Her uniform was torn and stained. Her face was pale. Her lips were cracked. But her eyes never changed. They remained fixed on that distant point, calm, steady, like the surface of a frozen lake. On the 10th day, a young servant made the mistake of meeting her gaze. He was bringing water to the interrogators when he looked at the prisoner. Just for a moment, just a quick glance, her gray eyes met his. The servant dropped the water. The cup shattered on the stone floor. He ran from the chamber and did not stop running until he reached the outer halls. When the other servants found him, he was shaking. "What did you see?" they asked. The servant could not explain it properly. He tried many times. The best he could do was this: she looked at me like I was already dead. Like the whole empire was already dead. Like she knew something we did not know. And whatever it was, it did not scare her. It scared me. The story spread faster after that. By the second week, everyone in the palace knew about the silent human. The nobles talked about her at their dinners. The guards talked about her during their patrols. Even the priests in the temple began to wonder if perhaps this human had been touched by some strange god. Emperor Kel'Thas VII heard the rumors on the 14th day. He was old, even by Valorian standards. He had ruled for 200 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds. Nothing surprised him anymore, but this surprised him. He called for reports. He read them carefully. A human woman. A ship captain. 14 days of interrogation. Not a single word spoken. Impossible, he thought. But the reports did not lie. Vorath himself had signed them. The Grand Inquisitor, who had never failed, was failing. The Emperor sat on his throne of melted weapons and thought about what this meant. If one human could resist, others might try. If the story spread beyond the palace, it might give hope to the conquered worlds. Hope was dangerous. Hope was the one thing his empire could not allow. He needed to do something. He needed to break this woman in front of everyone. He needed to show the galaxy that no one, not even a human, could defy the Valorian Empire. But first, he would send someone to observe her. Someone who could tell him what he was dealing with. Someone who understood alien species better than anyone else in the court. He would send his youngest son, Prince Theron. The Grand Throne Room of the Valorian Empire was the largest enclosed space in the known galaxy. Its ceiling rose 200 feet above the floor, supported by columns carved from the bones of conquered worlds. The walls were lined with the banners of fallen civilizations, thousands of them, stretching back to the first days of Valorian expansion. The floor was polished obsidian, so smooth and dark that it looked like a pool of still water. At the far end of the room sat the throne itself. It was massive, carved from the melted weapons of defeated enemies. Swords and spears and guns from 100 different species had been fused together into a mountain of dark metal. The emperor who sat upon it looked small by comparison, but his presence filled the room like smoke. Every seat was taken that morning. Noble lords and ladies filled the galleries, dressed in their finest robes of purple and black. Military commanders stood at attention along the walls, their armor gleaming. Ambassadors from vassal states watched from special boxes, their faces carefully neutral. Servants pressed against the back walls, straining to see. They had all come to watch the human break. Emperor Kelthos sat on his throne with his eldest son standing behind him. His scales were a deep purple, the color of royalty and power. His eyes glowed like distant stars. He had ruled the empire for 200 years, and in all that time, he had never faced a challenge he could not crush. Today would be no different. The doors at the far end of the room swung open. 4 guards entered first, their weapons drawn. Then came Grand Inquisitor Vareth, his scales still the dull gray of defeat. And behind him, her wrists bound in chains of black metal, walked Hannah Wright. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many of them had heard the stories, but this was the first time they had seen the human with their own eyes. She was smaller than they expected, thin and pale and fragile looking. How could this creature have resisted the Grand Inquisitor for 3 weeks? But as Hannah walked down the long aisle toward the throne, the murmurs faded into silence. There was something about the way she moved. Her steps were slow but steady. Her head was held high. Her gray eyes looked straight ahead, fixed on the Emperor who waited at the end of the room. She did not look like a prisoner walking to her judgment. She looked like a queen walking to her throne. The guards brought her to the center of the room and forced her to her knees. The chains rattled against the obsidian floor. Hannah knelt with her back straight, facing the Emperor. She did not bow her head. She did not lower her eyes. She simply waited. Emperor Kalthos rose from his throne. His voice echoed through the vast chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. Human, you have been held in our custody for 21 days. In that time, you have refused to answer any questions. You have refused to cooperate with our interrogators. You have shown nothing but contempt for the might of this empire. He descended the steps of his throne slowly, his robes trailing behind him like the tail of some great beast. We have offered you chances to speak. We have offered you opportunities to save yourself. You have rejected everyone. This is foolishness. This is pride. This is the arrogance of a species that does not understand its place in the galaxy. He stopped a few feet from where Hannah knelt. Up close, the difference between them was stark. He towered over her, nearly twice her height. His scales caught the light and gleamed like armor. His claws could have torn through her flesh with a single swipe, but Hannah did not flinch. She did not cower. She looked up at him with those gray eyes, calm and steady, as if she was the one passing judgment. The Emperor continued. Today, in front of the assembled might of the Valorian Empire, I give you one final chance. You will speak. You will tell us what we wish to know. The location of your home world, the strength of your fleet, the weaknesses of your species. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. Or you will die here, in front of everyone, and your death will serve as a message to all who would defy us. The chamber was utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on the kneeling human. The nobles leaned forward in their seats. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Even the servants, pressed against the walls, held their breath. This was the moment. This was what they had all come to see. The human would break now. She would have to. No one could face the Emperor directly and maintain their resistance. No one. Hannah looked at the Emperor for a long moment. Her face was impossible to read. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her head. She looked past the Emperor. She looked past the nobles and the guards and the ambassadors. She looked directly at Prince Theron, who stood in the gallery with his brothers, and she spoke. Theron. Just his name, nothing more. Her voice was rough from weeks of silence, but it carried through the chamber like a bell. The effect was immediate. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The Emperor went rigid, his scales flushing a deep crimson with shock and rage. The nobles began whispering furiously to each other. The guards looked at each other in confusion. She had spoken. After 3 weeks of absolute silence, she had finally spoken. But she had not spoken to the Emperor. She had not begged for mercy. She had not offered information or pleaded for her life. She had not even acknowledged the most powerful being in the galaxy. She had spoken to the prince, the soft prince, the prince who collected books instead of skulls, the prince who had sat with her and talked about stars and poetry. In that single moment, Hannah Wright had done something that no army had ever accomplished. She had made the Emperor look weak. Everyone in the room understood what had happened. She had been given a choice between the Emperor's demands and her own will. She had been told to speak or die, and she had chosen to speak, but she had chosen what to say. She had chosen who to acknowledge, and by choosing the youngest prince, the one everyone considered a disappointment, she had sent a message that thundered louder than any words. Your power means nothing to me. Your threats mean nothing. I speak when I choose to speak. I say what I choose to say. And I choose to acknowledge the one person in this room who treated me with kindness. The Emperor's face twisted with fury. He raised his hand, ready to signal the executioner, ready to end this embarrassment once and for all. But before the signal could fall, a voice rang out across the chamber. Father, I invoke the right of claim. Every head turned toward the gallery. Prince Theron had stepped forward, his scales pale with fear, but his voice steady. Kalthos turned to face his son. The right of claim was an ancient law, older than the Empire itself. It allowed any member of the royal family to take personal custody of a prisoner. It had been designed to let princes spare captured enemies of noble blood. It had never been used for a common soldier. It had certainly never been used for a human. You would not dare, the Emperor growled. The law is clear, Father. Theron's voice did not waver. Any prisoner may be claimed by royal blood. Any prisoner. No exceptions. The nobles erupted in whispered arguments. Some were outraged. Others were fascinated. A few, the older ones who remembered the ancient laws, nodded slowly. The prince was right. The law did not specify species or rank. It simply said any prisoner. The Emperor stood frozen for a long moment. His scales shifted through a dozen shades of red and purple and black. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to strike down his son where he stood. But to violate the ancient laws in front of the entire court would be to undermine everything the Empire was built on. You shame this house, he said finally. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. No, Father. Theron descended from the gallery and walked toward Hannah. His steps were slow but certain. She has shown us something we have forgotten. Strength is not only in conquest. There is power in choosing what we will not do. He reached Hannah and knelt beside her. With careful hands, he began to remove the chains from her wrists. She looked at me like I was a person, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. In 3 weeks of captivity, I was the only one who did that, and she remembered. That is not weakness, Father. That is strength of a kind we have never understood. The chains fell away. Theron stood and offered Hannah his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it and rose to her feet. The entire court watched in stunned silence as the youngest prince of the Valorian Empire led a human prisoner from the throne room. No one moved to stop them. No one spoke. The crown had fallen silent, and nothing would ever be the same again. Prince Theron was not like other Valorians. His brothers were warriors. They loved battle and conquest. They collected the skulls of their enemies and displayed them in their chambers. They spoke of war as if it was the highest form of art. Theron collected books. His chambers were filled with texts from 100 different worlds. He had dictionaries of dead languages. He had histories of fallen civilizations. He had poetry written by species that his own people had wiped from existence. When his brothers trained with weapons, Theron sat in his library and read. His father called him soft. His brothers called him weak. The court whispered that he was a disappointment to the royal bloodline. Theron did not care. He found more value in a single alien poem than in 1,000 conquered planets. When the Emperor summoned him and ordered him to observe the human prisoner, Theron felt something he had not felt in years. Curiosity. He had read about humans, of course. They were a young species from a small world on the edge of known space. They had only discovered faster than light travel a few generations ago. By Valorian standards, they were children. But they were children who had somehow pushed back against the mightiest empire in the galaxy. That alone made them interesting. Theron entered the interrogation chamber on the 15th day of Hanarite's captivity. He expected to find a broken creature. That was what always happened in these rooms. The prisoners started strong, but they all broke eventually. By day 15, they were usually hollow shells, babbling whatever the interrogators wanted to hear. What he found was something else entirely. Hannah sat in the metal chair at the center of the room. Her wrists were bound to the armrests. Her uniform was torn and dirty. There were cuts on her face and arms. She was thin from hunger and pale from lack of sunlight, but she was not broken. She sat with her back straight and her head high. Her gray eyes were clear and focused. When Theron entered the room, she turned to look at him. Not with fear, not with hatred, with something that took him a moment to identify. Interest. She was studying him. The same way he was studying her. The Grand Inquisitor was there too, standing in the corner with his scales as black as coal. He looked exhausted. There were lines on his face that had not been there 2 weeks ago. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My prince, he said, I do not know what to tell you. I have used every method I know. She will not break. Theron nodded but did not respond. He was too focused on the woman in the chair. There was something about her that he could not quite understand. Something in the way she held herself. She was a prisoner in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by beings who could kill her any moment. She should have been terrified. Instead, she looked almost peaceful. Theron pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. The Inquisitors started to say something, probably to warn him, but Theron held up his hand for silence. He wanted to try something different. My name is Theron, he said. I am the third son of Emperor Kalthos. I have not come to hurt you. Hannah did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on his face. I know you will not answer questions about your fleet or your home world, Theron continued. I am not going to ask those questions. I simply want to talk. Still nothing. Theron thought for a moment. Then he began to speak about Valoria. He described the capital city, with its towers of black stone and its streets paved with the dust of dead stars. He told her about the twin suns that painted the sky in shades of orange and gold during sunset. He spoke of the gardens where flowers grew in colors that had no names in most languages. Hannah did not speak. But Theron noticed that her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She was listening. Over the next 3 days, Theron returned again and again. Each time, he sat across from her and talked. He told her about Valorian history. He described the wars that had built the empire. He explained the gods his people worshipped, beings of fire and darkness who demanded strength above all else. He also read to her poetry from worlds she had never heard of. Stories from civilizations that had existed and vanished before humanity learned to walk upright. Tales of love and loss and triumph and tragedy. Hannah never said a word. But Theron could tell she was listening. Her eyes followed him when he moved around the room. Her head tilted slightly when he spoke of certain things. Once, when he described a particularly beautiful passage about starlight, he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Almost a smile. The other interrogators thought he was wasting his time. Vorath openly mocked him. The guards exchanged confused looks whenever he entered the chamber. But Theron did not care. He was learning more from this silent woman than he had learned from any of his books. On the 18th day, everything changed. Theron arrived at the chamber to find the guards in a state of alarm. Hannah's restraints had been removed for a medical examination. The doctors needed to check her wounds to make sure she would not die before the Emperor could decide her fate. The moment the restraints came off, Hannah stood up. The guards raised their weapons. The doctors backed away in fear. But Hannah did not attack. She did not try to escape. She simply walked across the room to the small window that looked out over the palace courtyard. And she stood there, looking at the sky. Theron pushed past the guards and entered the chamber. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle her. The guards were shouting for her to return to the chair, but she ignored them completely. Her attention was fixed on the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Theron stopped a few feet behind her. He could see her reflection in the glass. Her face was calm. There was no anger there, no fear. Just a quiet sadness that made his chest feel tight. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Hannah spoke. "Your stars are beautiful." Her voice was rough from weeks of silence. It was barely more than a whisper. But to Theron, it sounded like thunder. The guards erupted. They grabbed her arms and forced her back to the chair. They called for Vorth. They sent messages to the Emperor. The prisoner had spoken. After 18 days, the prisoner had finally spoken, but Theron barely heard any of it. He was too focused on what she had said. She had not begged for mercy. She had not offered information in exchange for her life. She had not cursed her captors or threatened revenge. She had spoken about beauty. In the middle of her captivity, surrounded by enemies who wanted her dead, she had looked at an alien sky and found it beautiful. That was the first thing she chose to say after 18 days of silence. Theron returned to his chambers that night and could not sleep. He kept thinking about her words. He kept thinking about the look on her face when she said them. He had met warriors who laughed in the face of death. He had read about heroes who faced impossible odds without fear, but he had never met anyone like Hannah Wright. She was not fighting them with weapons or strength. She was not even fighting them with silence, not really. She was simply refusing to let them decide who she was. They wanted her to be a prisoner. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to break. She had chosen to be something else. She had chosen to find beauty in their stars. She had chosen to hold on to her humanity even when everything else had been taken from her. And somehow, that choice was more powerful than anything Theron had ever seen. He understood now why his father was worried. This woman was dangerous, not because of what she might reveal, but because of what she represented. If one human could do this, then perhaps all humans could. And if all humans could resist like this, then the Valorian Empire had finally found something it could not conquer. The palace was a house of whispers now. Every corridor hummed with talk of the human prisoner. Every dining hall buzzed with speculation. Noble families, who had ignored the interrogation wing for generations, were suddenly sending servants to gather information. What was happening in that chamber? Was it true that the prisoner had spoken? What had she said? The truth spread quickly. She had said only 4 words. "Your stars are beautiful." Nothing about military secrets. Nothing about Earth. Just a comment about the sky. It made no sense to them. Why would anyone break 18 days of silence just to say something like that? Lady Vena, one of the most powerful nobles in the Empire, discussed it at her morning gathering. She had invited a dozen other ladies to her chambers. They drank sweet wine and talked about the human as if she was some kind of exotic animal. "Perhaps she has gone mad," Lady Vena suggested. 18 days with Vorth would destroy anyone's mind, but others were not so sure. The report said the human was calm, clear-eyed, completely in control. That was not madness. That was something else entirely. In the lower levels of the palace, the servants talked too. They had less freedom to speak openly, so they used glances and gestures to share information. The human was still alive. The human had spoken to Prince Theron. The human looked at the sky and called it beautiful. Some of the older servants remembered stories from their home worlds. Before the Empire came, before everything changed, they remembered tales of heroes who resisted tyrants, heroes who faced death without fear. They had thought such people only existed in stories. Now they were not so sure. Grand Inquisitor Vorath requested an audience with the Emperor on the 20th day. He walked into the throne room with his head bowed and his scales the color of ash. He had never looked so defeated. "I have failed, Your Majesty," he said. "I do not know what else to do." Emperor Kalthos sat on his throne of melted weapons and studied his Grand Inquisitor. Vorath had served the Empire for over a century. He had broken prisoners that entire armies could not defeat. He was the best at what he did, and one human woman had defeated him. "Tell me everything," the Emperor commanded. Vorath spoke for nearly an hour. He described every technique he had used. He explained the science of pain and fear. He talked about the ways that human bodies were supposed to respond to torture. Everything should have worked. Everything had always worked before, but the human was different. She did not fight back. She did not plead. She simply existed in a state of complete detachment, as if her body and her mind were two separate things. The pain touched her body but never reached her spirit. "She is not like the others," Vorath concluded. "I do not know if any human is like her. But if they are, if they can all do what she does, then we have a problem." The Emperor dismissed him and sat alone in the darkness of his throne room. He thought about what Vorath had said. He thought about the reports from the Outer Rim, where human ships had started winning battles they should have lost. He thought about the strange determination that seemed to drive this young species. Then he thought about his son. Theron had been visiting the prisoner every day. The guards had told him everything. The prince sat with the human and talked to her. He read her poetry. He treated her like a guest instead of an enemy. It was embarrassing. It was inappropriate. It was exactly the kind of soft behavior that Kalthos had always feared from his youngest son. But perhaps it could be useful. The Emperor summoned his advisors and made a decision. The human would be brought before the full court in 2 days. Every noble house would attend. Every ambassador. Every military commander. The entire empire would witness what happened next. The human would speak and answer their questions. Or she would die in front of everyone. Either way, the whispers would stop. Either way, the empire would show its strength. News of the announcement spread through the palace within hours. The nobles began preparing their finest clothes. The servants cleaned every surface until it gleamed. The guards polished their armor and sharpened their weapons. Everyone wanted to look their best for the spectacle. Prince Theron heard the news from a servant while he was in his library. He put down the book he was reading and sat in silence for a long time. His hands were shaking. In 2 days, Hannah Wright would either break or die. After everything she had endured, after the incredible strength she had shown, it would end in that throne room. The Emperor would make an example of her. He would prove that no one could resist the Empire forever. Theron thought about going to his father. He thought about begging him to change his mind. But he knew it would do no good. Kalthos had never reversed a public decision. To do so would be to show weakness. And weakness was the one thing the Emperor could never show. That night, Theron went to the interrogation chamber one last time. Hannah was back in her chair. The restraints had been replaced after her brief walk to the window. She looked thinner than before. The cuts on her face had begun to heal, leaving thin white lines across her skin. But her eyes were the same. gray and calm and endlessly deep. "I suppose you have heard," Darren said. Hannah did not respond. But something in her face shifted slightly. "She knew. My father wants you to break in front of everyone," Darren continued. "He wants to show the galaxy that humans can be defeated just like anyone else. He's afraid of what you represent." He sat down across from her, just as he had done so many times before. "I want you to know that I think he is wrong. I have spent my whole life studying other species. I have read their stories. I have learned their languages. I have tried to understand them. And in all that time, I have never met anyone like you." Hannah's eyes met his. There was something there. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition, acknowledgement. She saw him too. "I do not know what you believe," Theron said. "I do not know what gives you the strength to endure this. But whatever it is, I want you to know that I respect it. I respect you." He stood up and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back one more time. "I am sorry that I cannot save you. I am sorry that I am not strong enough to stand against my father. But I will remember you, Hannah, right? No matter what happens in that throne room, I will remember what you showed me." He left the chamber and returned to his quarters. Behind him, in the cold darkness of the interrogation room, Hannah Wright sat in silence. But for the first time in 3 weeks, there were tears on her cheeks, though not tears of fear or pain or despair. Tears of something else entirely. The next day passed slowly. The palace buzzed with anticipation. Servants ran through the corridors carrying decorations and supplies. Nobles arrived from distant provinces, eager to witness the spectacle. The throne room was prepared with extra seating to accommodate the crowd. Hannah was given food and water for the first time in days. The emperor wanted her strong enough to stand. He wanted her conscious and aware when she faced the court. A broken body would not be satisfying. He needed her whole so that breaking her would mean something. She ate what they gave her. She drank the water. She let the doctors tend to her wounds. And through it all, she said nothing. That night, the palace fell quiet. Even the whispers stopped. Everyone was waiting. Everyone knew that tomorrow would change everything. In his chambers, Prince Theron lay awake and stared at the ceiling. He thought about courage. He thought about what it meant to be strong. His whole life, he had been told that strength meant conquering others. Strength meant making others kneel. Strength meant never showing mercy. But Hannah had shown him a different kind of strength. The strength to endure. The strength to hold on to yourself when everything was trying to tear you apart. The strength to find beauty in an enemy's sky. Maybe, he thought, that was the greatest strength of all. He did not sleep that night. Neither did Hannah. The story spread faster than light. Within hours of the throne room incident, every communication channel in the Empire was buzzing with the news. A human prisoner had defied the Grand Inquisitor for 3 weeks. She had faced the Emperor himself and refused to break. And the youngest prince had invoked an ancient law to save her life. By the next day, the story had reached the outer colonies. By the end of the week, it had spread to the vassal states. By the end of the month, there was not a single inhabited world in the Empire that had not heard about Hannah Wright and Prince Theron. The reaction was not what Emperor Kalthos had expected on Valorian worlds. The nobles were outraged. They demanded that the prince be punished. They called for the human to be executed despite the ancient law. They insisted that the Empire's honor had been stained and needed to be restored through blood. But on the conquered worlds, something different was happening. The servants whispered the story to each other in the dark corners of great houses. The workers repeated it in the mines and the factories. The slaves scratched it onto walls where their masters could not see. A human had resisted. A human had won. For species that had been crushed under the Empire's boot for generations, It was the first real hope they had felt in a long time. Rebellions began to spark across the outer territories. Small ones at first. A group of miners refusing to work. A village hiding escaped prisoners. A ship captain changing course away from Imperial space. Nothing that could threaten the Empire on its own. But together, they were a fire waiting to spread. Prince Theron and Hannah left the capital world 3 days after the throne room incident. The Emperor had made it clear that his son was no longer welcome in the palace. Theron was given a small ship and a handful of loyal servants. He was told to take his human and go. They traveled toward neutral space, toward the border where Valorian control faded and other powers held influence. It was a journey of several weeks, and during that time, Theron and Hannah finally had a chance to talk. She was weak at first. The 3 weeks of captivity had taken a toll on her body. She slept for long hours and ate small meals, and spent much of her time looking out the window at the passing stars. But slowly, day by day, she began to recover. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector of space, Theron found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his mind since the throne room. Why me? He sat across from her in the small common area of the ship. Why did you speak my name? Hannah was quiet for a moment. She had changed out of her ruined uniform and now wore simple clothes that one of the servants had found for her. Without the dirt and blood, she looked younger. More human, somehow. Because you were the only one who treated me like a person, she said finally. Your empire tried to break me with pain. They thought that if they hurt me enough, I would give them what they wanted. But pain only reaches so far. It can touch the body, but it cannot touch the soul. She looked at him, and there was warmth in her gray eyes that he had never seen before. You sat with me, she continued. You talked to me. You read me poetry and told me about your world. You showed me that there was something good in your people. Something worth saving. Theron felt something tighten in his chest. He had always believed that his love of learning was a weakness. His father had told him so 1,000 times. But here was this woman, this human who had endured things that would have broken anyone else, telling him that his weakness was actually strength. I was afraid, he admitted. In that throne room, I was terrified. I thought my father would kill me for defying him. Hannah smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad, but real. Being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. They sat in silence for a while after that, watching the stars drift past. You asked why I spoke your name, Hannah said eventually. But there is more to it than just kindness. I also did it to send the message. What message? That the Empire can be beaten. She turned to face him fully. Not with weapons. Not with ships. With something they never expected. Connection. Compassion. The simple act of seeing another, being as worthy of respect. She leaned forward, her voice growing stronger. Your people have conquered 100 worlds because they believed that strength is the only thing that matters. They thought that if they were powerful enough, nothing could stop them. But they were wrong. There are things that power cannot touch. There are walls that no army can break down. Like what? Hannah met his eyes. Like the human spirit. Like the choice to hold on to who you are no matter what anyone does to you. Your father wanted me to give him information. He thought that was what mattered. But I knew that the real battle was not about secrets. It was about control. He wanted to control me. He wanted to own my fear and my pain and my surrender. And I refused to give him any of it. Theron understood then. He understood what the Empire had been fighting all along without even knowing it. It was not just one human woman. It was the idea she represented. The idea that there were things more important than survival. That some things were worth dying for. And if humans could believe that, if they could hold on to that belief, even in the face of torture and death, Then the Empire had already lost. News of their escape reached Earth 3 weeks after they entered neutral space. Hannah sent a message through diplomatic channels, explaining what had happened. She told them about her capture, her resistance, and her rescue by the alien prince. The human government was cautious at first. They did not trust Theron. He was a Valorian, after all, the son of their greatest enemy. But Hannah vouched for him. She told them about the poetry he had read to her. She told them about the moment in the throne room when he had stood against his own father. "He's not like them," she said. "And if there is one like him, there might be others. We can win this war, not just with ships and weapons, but with something the Valorians never expected." "What is that?" the human admiral asked. "Hope," Hannah replied. "The knowledge that we are unbreakable." The war continued for another decade. The Valorian Empire threw everything it had at humanity, but the humans did not break. They fought back with ships and soldiers, yes, but also with something else. With stories. With the story of Hannah Wright and the 3 weeks of silence that shook an empire. On conquered worlds, slaves whispered her name like a prayer. Rebels painted her face on walls. Children born into captivity heard about the woman who had looked the emperor in the eye and refused to bend. They grew up believing that resistance was possible. And when they were old enough, many of them joined the fight. Prince Theron never returned to Valorian space. He stayed with the humans, serving as an advisor and a bridge between the two species. He helped them understand his people, their culture, their weaknesses. He translated Valorian communications and identified key targets. Some humans never fully trusted him. They remembered the atrocities his people had committed. They could not forgive easily. But others, those who knew the whole story, understood that he had made a harder choice than any of them. He had betrayed everything he was raised to believe. He had turned against his own blood to stand for what was right. Hannah Wright never held another military command. Her body had been too damaged by the interrogation. But she became something more important than a captain. She became a symbol. She traveled across human space, speaking to crowds, meeting with soldiers, reminding everyone why they were fighting, not for territory, not for resources, for the right to be who they were, for the right to hold on to their humanity, even when the universe wanted to tear it away. The Valorian Empire fell 20 years after the throne room incident. It did not fall all at once. It crumbled slowly, piece by piece, as rebellion after rebellion chipped away at its foundation. The final blow came not from human weapons, but from within. The conquered species rose up together. They remembered Hannah's story. They believed they could win, and they did. On the day the Empire officially surrendered, Hannah Wright stood at a window in her small home on Earth and looked up at the stars. She was old now. Her gray eyes had faded. Her hands shook when she lifted her cup of tea. But she was still the woman who had knelt before an emperor and refused to break. Theron stood beside her, his scales now tinged with gray as well. They had been friends for over 20 years. Some said they were more than friends. But what they were to each other was their own business. "We did it," Theron said quietly. "It is over." Hannah nodded slowly. She thought about the interrogation chamber. She thought about the pain and the hunger and the endless questions. She thought about the moment she had looked at an alien sky and found it beautiful. It was never about winning or losing, she said. It was about showing them what we are, what we can be. That no matter how powerful someone is, they cannot take away your choice of who you want to be. She reached out and took his hand. "You showed me that too, you know. In that chamber, when you sat with me and read poetry, you showed me that there was good in the universe. You gave me something to hold on to." Theron squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me something too. You showed me that strength is not about conquest. It is about staying true to yourself, even when the whole galaxy wants you to be something else. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, on 100 different worlds, new stories were